I'm Joe Bonifate of Arch Masonry and Restoration. Today we are going to finish the joints on a concrete block wall. One thing you'll notice is that there's not a lot of holes in the joints. This is very helpful when finishing the work. If you have holes, then you are forced to use mortar from your trowel to fill the holes as you strike. Not only is this time consuming, it often smears the work and is unpresentable. Makes for a harder cleanup job as well. You're always going to strike the head joints first, that's the vertical joint, and the bed joint second. Typically, we're going to do a consistent pattern down the wall. We only have a corner here, but the method is the same. Joint, 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 come here, joint, 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 and so on and so forth in a regular wall situation. This prevents you from missing a joint, but it also is a very efficient way to move down the wall. Now when you do the bed joints, you never push into a corner. You always pull from a corner. Oftentimes, you may need to put a little bit of mortar on the tip. Not so much here, but you can see here and here that some is missing. Same thing with an end of a wall, a window jamb, a tail of a lead like this. Don't go into it. Typically, if your bottom joint at the floor level is exposed, you're going to need to cut that flush. Make sure your holes are filled. Now that's the first pass. We're going to brush it and hit it again in a scenario where this is a finished wall. It's just getting a coat of paint. Maybe it's not even being painted. If it's being covered up, then if it's a structural wall or we're concerned about it, we may strike it like this, brush it and be done. We might not do anything other than just brush it down to get the burrs off. Another thing that we want to do right here is a chip. So we're going to want to patch that chip in the event that this is simply a painted wall. What we're going to want to do to get that chip patched is we're going to take a wet lime block. This is, I just dipped it in a bucket of water a moment ago. And we're going to rub that material into that chip. Then we're going to take our tool and cut this joint in. Now we've created excess material at the bottom. That we want to cut flush with our trowel. And now what we have is a finished appearance. And when this wall's painted, no one will know that there was a chip there. The next step is to brush the wall. This is where many people make mistakes and they get sloppy. Never brush up and down or side to side. As you're going with the mortar joint, if the mortar's slightly damp, you're going to pull mortar out. Always go at an angle. Where a lot of people err is they'll do that and they'll think that they've done a good job. But you can see right here in the corner, there's some exposed chippage. Right here, this is not perfectly clean. You really need to rub the wall with your brush. In order to take the brush strokes out, we're going to strike it again. Now we're going to use the smaller end of our barrel striker, and we're just lightly going to finish the joint just to take the brush stroke out. We're not going to make a depression, make more mortar ooze out, and make cause for needing to brush it again. Just putting a little shine on that joint. You don't want to use the tip of your tool to finish the joint. You want to hold it flat and use the face of the tool, like this. When you do the tip, you have imperfections in the joint. They look like this. you can kind of see a shadow in a couple of places. What's happening is you're scraping the tip across. Anytime the tip hits an imperfection in the block, it moves the tool, makes kind of a skip or an imperfection, rather than holding it flat. Many masons do this, especially if they let the mortar get hard, because it's easier on the wrist to dig the tool across, dig that tip, dig that joint. But that's not the proper way. The proper way is to face it. Face it with the tool. It is a little bit more difficult, a little bit more pressure on your wrist, but it is the proper way to use the tool and finish the wall. Okay, so now we're going to talk about finishing an inside corner. Leaving it like this is never acceptable, even if the wall is going to be covered. We want to be cut flush and free of holes and voids. So sometimes just finishing it with the trowel is acceptable. Sometimes if it's being painted, you can finish it with your trowel. The issue is that sometimes you have voids, and doing that with a trowel makes a rather sloppy mess. Now, oftentimes people will use their striking iron, since it's in their hand, doing the other joints, fill this, and then cut it. That's a good technique if the wall's being painted, and we'll go over that in a moment. But in the event that the wall is not going to be painted, maybe it's a Keller block, maybe this is an inside corner of a ground face wall, you're going to have to use a slicker. A slicker is a tucking tool like this, with the blades just a little bit wider than what you would do for a tucking tool. Every mason should have one in their bag. Got a little bit of lime in there. And it can be a neater way to finish that inside corner without smearing it. Most commonly, what we see are walls that are going to be painted block. And in that case, you can use your striker to fill your voids. I don't have voids here, but we're going to pretend like I have voids here. So you can fill that whole joint up real quick with your tool. Now, leaving it that way, walking away with it like this is not acceptable. Big time no-no. Many people do it, big time no-no. The proper way is to take a wet lime block or a piece of wood and finish it that way. Another one of my favorite items is a brick hammer. If you have a nice square head on your brick hammer, and it should be right here on your hammer loop. I'm not wearing one, shame on me. Every good block layer should have a hammer loop in his hammer right here. You might be using line dogs or something else for your line, so you don't have a line block handy. You take your hammer off. And you finish the joint that way. Then, after you do that, you're going to do your bed joint. One thing that's different is we have no choice in a corner but to kind of go with the joint. Always, before you brush a wall, get the big boogers off with the tip of your trowel. It prevents you from unnecessarily making smears with your brush. After you brush the wall, you're going to find that oftentimes you can leave the inside corner alone. Sometimes you might want to re-dampen your piece of wood and go over it again. Oftentimes, when you double strike your wall, you're going to come in here like this. Try to get that strike to go as nice and neatly into that corner as you can. So that inside edge that you rubbed out really looks like block when it's painted. When it's painted, it looks like the block just disappears. We have a slight imperfection in this corner. Not sure if you could see it, but typically I would not let that go. I would reapply a little bit of mortar right there. But that's the proper way to finish an inside corner. Never leave it with holes and boogers hanging on it, and never leave it finished with just your striker tool.